It is 11 o'clock East Coast time. Sports Center continues, and the Boston Celtics have just wrapped up their 18th title in the history of the franchise as they knock off the Dallas Mavericks in 5, part of a dominant run in the regular season through the playoffs. They won 80 games all in. We will have full post-game coverage over the course of this next hour, visits with players from the winning team, Tim Legler's analysis as well, and live reports from Boston. Deuce with Papa as the confetti falls. Got to be a remarkable feeling. A finish line of sorts, and in many ways not, because that's a very young dude who's got so much more runway in his NBA career. But things change when you get that chip, because now the questions of can ya, those are replaced by can and did. Tim Legler is with us, and we will have plenty of time to discuss in great detail. I would just ask you, as a first sort of overarching thought, what it was about this Boston team that made them so markedly superior to Dallas over the course of the NBA Finals.
Their depth of playmakers, the depth of shooting components. They did something very hard to do, Scott. They took a team that was really good a year ago, and they took their best 2 defensive players off of that team. Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, replaced them with better offensive players without giving up anything defensively, because you add Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday. And that transformed them now into this offensive buzzsaw that clearly Dallas didn't have enough answers for. It was going to require Dallas's absolute best. I believe they could have given them a very competitive series, maybe even taken this thing to distance. But it's going to require your best. I thought Dallas was far below their best. A lot of it having to do with Boston and what they were able to do to them and the situations they put them in defensively. Dallas just did not have enough. Boston was clearly the better team in this series, and they had too many answers.
Winning one, and we just saw a major championship yesterday for Bryson DeChambeau, and I said to him, when you win one, right, that's a lot in golf. They're hard to get.
Sure.
Right? You win a second, and then it puts you in a different category. For Boston now, this is 18 for the franchise, but this is one for this group as constructed. In what way might this sort of open the doors for them to add to it? We know, Tim, how hard it is to get these, but freed up of you can't do it, you haven't done it, and all the chatter. Does this feel something like the beginning to you?
I do believe that. There's a breakthrough, and there's something that you feel now internally. And what I've said about this team repeatedly, the best thing to happen to Jason Tatum was when they got and added the players that they added to this team, the margin for error was greater for him specifically and for Jaylen Brown. And that gave you the luxury where they could win games on nights when those guys weren't great offensively. And that wasn't the case in the past. And so now that they've actually experienced getting this thing across the finish line with exactly what I'm describing on a given night, not necessarily knowing who that was going to be, that's now what you've created now is a problem going forward for everybody else if they keep this team intact.
And isn't that what was so clearly lacking for Dallas? I mean, once you got past Luka, who had a big night again, once you got past him, I mean, look, outside of a night where they just obliterated Boston on a Friday night and they actually got a win, gentleman sweep and all that, Dallas just didn't have the depth of scoring option that Boston had.
It was going to take a lot more. Kyrie Irving was 3 games in Boston was well below what he's capable of doing, and that crowd affected him. He admitted that it affected him. It did again tonight. I mean, Luka was going to need Kyrie Irving to be special in the series. He was far from that, and he was
all playoffs long. Until, and I think, and again, we got runway to talk about this. It's interesting. I want to get more into that, Kyrie, because I admire the fact that he spoke so openly about being able to unpack the stuff from his Boston years. But you still got to go back there, right? And you still got to see it, and you got to feel it. And maybe there was more to feel than perhaps even he anticipated. We'll have time to discuss that. Understandably, Tim Legler is alongside. In the fight game, you throw a flurry of punches to end a round. Maybe you can steal a round. I'm not saying that Tatum would have stolen the MVP, but 31-11 in a finals game. What does the fact that Brown won the MVP tell you?
Before I answer that, I want to say, first of all, how happy I am for Jason Tatum and what he just said about Al Horford. Al Horford has been one of my personal favorite players in the league in his generation. Both of those guys are role models. They're professionals.
Pros.
They're exemplary pros in every way on and off the court. They deserve this moment, so I'm happy for both of those guys.
Okay.
To answer your question about what separated them, I thought it was really tight neck and neck, depending on how tonight played out. They both played pretty well. I thought Tatum's offensive burst may have been the tipping point. Here's what that vote tells me. There was a lot of stock put into Jaylen Brown's defense in this series because he got Luka a lot more of this series than Jason Tatum did, and I thought Jaylen Brown impacted him. He also had one of the bigger moments in this series. We didn't get a lot of drama late.
2-point game, and he hit the shot.
Game 3 in Dallas, Jaylen Brown, after Dallas cut that lead, and it was a 2-point game. Jaylen Brown's the one that hit that mid-range jumper that got them that win that really prevented any real anxiety from setting into this series for the Boston Celtics. So I think it was neck and neck. Could have gone either way. I am not surprised it was Jaylen Brown because I think his defense was the tipping point for him.
Largely, Luka scored big. Kyrie did not. And we talked a little bit about it earlier. I want to dive in a little deeper. I'm not asking you to play psychiatrist here for the man because it's not our job. But just in terms of what he was and was not able to provide on the floor, is it possible that perhaps Boston being there and that crowd in that building impacted him in ways he didn't anticipate?
There is no question about it, and he even admitted it, which really surprised me going into this game. He had some sound yesterday where he kind of pulled the curtain back a little bit, and he used the term self-doubt, that he had to eliminate the self-doubt. You rarely hear anything like that from a player of this caliber and a player that's this confident, that's been so good on big stages at other times in his career. But Scott, the bottom line is in games 1 and 2, I thought he was very indecisive. It clearly was affecting him. He never got into rhythm, recovered, played well in Dallas, got back to this moment. You're wondering, okay, well, now you've got some rhythm. Can that travel with you back to Boston? Very quiet again, did not score in the first quarter of this game. And that game, I thought, really got away from Dallas at the end of that first quarter when Boston went on a little bit of a run. And here you go, end of the first quarter, you're down 10. Kyrie has not injected himself into this game at all. So 3 of the 5 games played in Boston, Kyrie Irving far below his best in all 3 of those games.
You like Dallas in this series, and it wasn't particularly close in the end. I don't want to frame it like what'd you miss, but what were you anticipating that didn't materialize for the Mavericks in the finals?
Going into this, and I said that for me, the determining factor in the series, well, of course, obviously, you're expecting the stars to play great.
Right.
So that has to be a given.
Well, they had all playoffs long.
That had to be a given. And
Right.
Kyrie and Luka were both going to play great offensively. But for me, it was Dallas's defense against Boston. Dallas's defense was so good for the last 3 months of the season, so good when they needed to be throughout most of the postseason. They just did not have an answer to slow this team down. They could not defend them in isolation or ball screen or switches. Too much penetration, which caused a lot of miscommunications on their rotations, trying to protect guys and cover for guys. Scott, when you go over defensively where you want to send the ball, then you can map out where your help's going to come from and where the slides come from. And everything's kind of a plan. When you're constantly getting beat to either side all night long and all series long, that means now you're really counting on 2 players being able to communicate in the moment because this is not the way we practice our defense. And it just became a fire drill for Dallas too often, too many possessions, and they made too many mistakes. Boston's got too much talent when you do that.
So ultimately, if we walk ourselves backwards from the final where Dallas loses to Boston, they were able to beat Minnesota because that was a favorable matchup for them. Minnesota was able to beat Denver because it was a favorable matchup for them. And it's just, I mean, whether it's the NCAA tournament or the NBA finals, ultimately this sport comes down to matchups, and Boston's a hell of a difficult matchup, I think, right now for anybody, aren't they?
No question. And one thing that really came to the fore in this series was the way that they can make you play when they move the ball beyond the first pass out of any action. And Joe Mazzulla has alluded to this throughout the series. You saw it again tonight, particularly in that first half, the way that Jason Tatum played. They'd run an action, it'd come out, and then it would be a secondary action where they're going to force you now to play multiple effort defense on the same possession. And Dallas just was not up to the task for the most part in this series. They could not figure out how to guard them. It's going to be a great learning experience for them, reflective experience for them. And we're going to see how much and how willing Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, and this group are to lay it on the line over the summer to come back better. Clearly, they're going to try to add pieces, but this is a learning experience for them. They went up against a team that just was better really in every way in this series.
Yeah, there's such a tendency for the team that loses in the finals to have it turn into somehow they were lousy. I mean, there was just so much to love about what Dallas did and what they accomplished to get to this point. And